Então, boa tarde para todos que vieram aqui presencialmente prestigiar a palestra e para os que estão nos assistindo online. Em nome do programa de pós-graduação em psicologia, eu quero dar as boas-vindas à doutora Caroline Futzpatrick, que veio fazer essa segunda palestra, né? Ela fez uma primeira palestra sobre os efeitos da exposição às telas na infância e hoje ela vai falar sobre esse tema na adolescência. A doutora Caroline Futzpatrick é professora de desenvolvimento na Universidade de Sherbrooke, na Faculdade de Educação, e pesquisadora visitante na Universidade de Joanesburgo, no Departamento de Educação Infantil. Ela também é titular da Cátedra de Pesquisa Tier 2, Canadá, sobre o uso de mídias digitais por crianças e suas implicações na promoção da união, uma abordagem ecossistêmica. Sua pesquisa visa compreender melhor as consequências dos hábitos midiáticos de crianças e jovens no desenvolvimento físico, cognitivo e social. Em 2023, ela recebeu o Prêmio Tramplin pela sua contribuição excepcional para a investigação nas ciências sociais. Thank you so much for being here again with us, Caroline.
Muito obrigada, Patrícia.
Muito obrigada também. Então, vamos lá.
Olá a todos, boa tarde. It's nice to be back with you again today. So I won't introduce myself in detail like I did the first time. I'm just going to kind of give you a little bit of background and then just dive into my research on adolescents and their media use. So still don't have any conflicts of interest. So maybe as a bit of a general background, this is the case in North America a lot. So there's a lot of controversy surrounding media use, social media use, video game playing, and its possible impact on behavior, on mental health in young people. So a lot of this started when there was a very high profile article that came out in The Atlantic. So The Atlantic is a very popular kind of a newspaper. And it claimed that the entire generation of millennials and Gen Zs were completely ruined people because of cell phones, that these were people that were going to not be productive, that would not be able to hold down jobs, that would not finish school. So take them, put them in the garbage, this generation is done. So obviously this creates some controversy and some backlash. And I think there's been a counter to this saying, well, youth are not stupid. Youth make decisions for themselves. We're not just puppets of the industry. We have some agency. So there's this back and forth that's going on. And I think it's important to keep it as in mind as a researcher and to try and, again, disentangle what is scientific fact from what is fiction or an exaggeration, right? So these things happen in my province in Quebec as well. This is a newspaper saying in French that media use is a real serious public health problem. And in this, I was actually misquoted by the journalist as saying that media use was like cigarette smoking. So she said, researcher says it's just as dangerous as cigarette smoking. And I had to go like this for about a week and not leave my room. So, and then beyond this, I think I shared with you recently, you can see this story, $4.5 billion. So a collective of teachers in the province of Ontario, Canada, are currently suing Snapchat, Facebook, TikTok, Meta, which includes Instagram, for $4.5 million because they say that these media have made their students impossible to teach. They're too distracted. They have too many mental health concerns. So that's the argument that's happening right now. And then last, I think an important event was in 2023 when the Surgeon General of the United States, so this is the person that makes laws about wearing a seatbelt, not drinking and driving, came out and made a statement saying that although he cannot conclude that social media causes mental health problems, he says, I cannot conclude that social media is safe. And that's kind of like the other side of the argument, right? We have no proof that it is safe, that is not causing these mental health problems. So he urges caution, more research, and training of teachers and professionals on these topics. So this is kind of where the field is at. Now, again, I've presented to you, I already presented this slide a few weeks ago, but I'm just going to go over it again, maybe in the context of adolescence. So, of course, we're concerned about screen time, or the amount of time that youth spend in front of screens, how much time they spend playing video games or using social media or watching television is of concern. But it's not the only part of their media diet that I think we need to consider. So the content of what they're exposed to is likely to have different effects on them. So if you're playing very violent video games versus playing a pro-social video game, that can alter the consequences. If you're mostly watching shows on Netflix that are documentaries or that have, some positive messages about diversity and inclusion, that's probably more beneficial than watching The Housewives of Beverly Hills on a regular basis. And lastly, how you're using screen time. So if you're using it actively, using it to FaceTime with your friends or family member, or if you're just, watching videos go through on YouTube, if you're just very passively using the media, that's also an important factor to consider. And then there's also the issues of context. So when, where, why people use media. So we know that media late at night, before bedtime or after bedtime is very bad for people's sleep cycles. Using media during meal times is also bad for your health. And then there's maybe a larger distinction about using media in the school context to complete homework versus using it at home for leisure. So these are all important to consider, as well as the user's individual characteristics. So what is the gender? What is the sexual orientation? What is the socioeconomic background of the user? These could all also influence the consequences of their media habits. So again, we talked about some possible mechanisms to explain why media might have an impact on youth development and youth health. So these would be, in a very basic sense, the first one would be displacement. So if young people, adolescents, are spending 6, 8, 9, 10 hours using screens, well, that's probably taking time away from their sleep, their physical activity, the time they would have to interact face-to-face with friends, the time they would have to pursue other kinds of leisure activities that are probably more developmentally enriching and that might be also essential for their health and mental health. Second, we also know that social learning mechanisms are extremely important in growth and development. So I talked about these a little bit in the context of childhood, but this also applies as youth start using, for example, social media. We use social comparisons all the time to situate ourselves compared to others. And when we use social media, what's different, I guess, with social media versus classically generations ago when we had a magazine is that youth are no longer comparing themselves only to supermodels or to celebrities. Now they're comparing themselves to each other. And so if they compare themselves to others, their peers, people they view as more similar to them, and they're repeatedly comparing themselves in a downward way, if they're doing that repeatedly negatively, that can have an impact on their self-esteem, for example. And last, we also know more and more that certain types of media use, playing very highly stimulating video games would be one example, can be disruptive to people's reward systems, so repeated activation of the reward system, or could also have negative impacts on their attentional system, because a lot of social media is very short span bursts of entertainment. And if we're constantly soliciting this kind of easy to engage attention, we're not soliciting and working on our more effortful engagement and attention. So there is also the idea that media could become disruptive because of these mechanisms. So today we're focusing on, we're going to look at adolescents, but we'll go a little bit into preteens as well. And the reason I usually present these results separately from those on younger children is because the characteristics of adolescents are different. So they don't use media the same way. They're a lot less supervised by their parents. Young children tend to be supervised, not always, but tend to be. And adolescents spend more time using social media, and they play more video games. So those are some key user differences. Then we know also that developmentally, adolescents are different from younger children. So adolescents are more into sensation seeking. They're more sensitive to peer influence. They're more impulsive. So all of these things will also have an impact on how they react to media. And last but not least, I think there's some important individual characteristics to consider here. We're only going to today we're only going to talk about differences between boys and girls, but here are some key points, I think, to highlight between boys and girls. So boys and girls spend approximately the same amount of time using media, similar, but they don't do the same things. So boys are likely to spend more time playing video games and accessing adult-only websites, also known as pornography websites. And girls are more likely to use social media and to use chatting kind of applications with their friends. So the types of things that girls and boys do, and these are generalizations. I know that there are differences. Not all girls, some girls love video games, but these are, trends that we can note. Okay, so here's, you'll see one graph with the lines on it. These are trends in teenagers and pre-teenagers media use since 2015. So what do you notice if you look at the track between 2015 and 2021? What do you guys notice here? It's increasing. Yes. And it seems to have taken a sharp increase during the pandemic. So we don't have 2020 specifically on the line, but I think the authors of this study sort of cited the pandemic as a factor that probably led to increases in screen time. So we don't have enough time. Not enough time has elapsed for us to know if screen time has decreased post-pandemic. So we still have to wait that out and wait maybe 2-3 years so we can see if we go back to pre-pandemic levels. But it's clear here that screen time is very high. So these are, for the dark green line, teenagers, about 8 hours per day using media. That's a lot of the day. That's a big part of the day. And then on the graph next to it, the only thing I wanted to point out here is that usage seems to be different based on socio-demographic characteristics. So income, ethnic background, this is American data, and a little bit less for gender. And it seems to be the case that more vulnerable youth, those from more disadvantaged backgrounds, spend the most time using screens. So here I want to draw your attention to the graphic. So just, if you can just look at the graphic and try and make out the words that are written in pretty small font. You have trends in depression symptoms over time for boys and girls separately. So in this graph here, what is striking?
Female depression syndrome is skyrocketing, right?
It's skyrocket. Yes. It tends to be higher, but then there's a big skyrocket. Does everybody see that? Mm-hmm. And when is it skyrocketing? 2012. So what do you think happened around 2010, 11, and 12? That is one. And 2010, we got the iPad, and the iPhones are exploding in popularity. So this is what some researchers, Twenge and her team in California, kind of said, look at these historical trends. This is due to social media. However, we talked about this, and it's important to think about this again. We cannot draw a causal conclusion from the coincidence of two historical events, right? We need to go a bit beyond that. So interesting, and it gives us the hypothesis of what might be happening, but we need to go further in our research. So this is a statistic that I find very interesting, and it's from the province of Quebec. So the majority of adolescents and young adults, when you ask them about their screen use, the majority say, I think my own screen use is problematic. So I think that's, again, this is descriptive data, but it's giving us a sense that, well, it's not just adults, older adults wagging their finger at the kids saying, oh, they're ruining themselves, they don't know what they're doing. Youth themselves are reporting this, that they find that their use is problematic. And a lot of them say, I'd like to use media less. I'd like to be online less. So on top of this, there have been some studies, correlational, cross-sectional, descriptive, suggesting that screen media can increase depression, anxiety, impulsivity, and decrease helping pro-social behavior. And we also know that in girls, these effects are present for reduced body image. So more time using screen media is associated with less positive body image in girls, and that becomes a risk factor for depression, but also for eating disorders and health problems. So this idea that correlation is not causation is really important when we think about social media, media use, and how it might impact mental health. Because yes, it could be the case that using social media, being on Instagram, using the internet leads to bad mental health. But it could also be the case that youth who are not doing so well in school, who are not doing well, who have a hard time relating to peers, choose to go online and spend more time there. Maybe they're choosing to avoid problems. Maybe it's escapism. Maybe it's a form of self-medication because it gives them some dopamine. So there's this idea that directions could be going in the other way, or they might be going in both directions at the same time, right? There might be a bidirectional association between mental health and media use. So in my team, we decided to test out this hypothesis. So we used data here from a Quebec longitudinal study in which children were followed from birth till their mid-20s. So they were followed about every year or every 2 years over the course of this time. And this is a population-based study. So it was designed by statisticians to be representative, to be a representative portrait of the population at the time. So it was about 2,000 that were followed from the start, and there was obviously some attrition over time. So screen time in the earlier phases of the study, when the children were young, was reported by parents, but eventually the youth themselves reported their media habits. And mental health was reported either by the adolescents themselves. They reported their symptoms of, for example, depression, or sometimes we had teacher reports of how they were doing behaviorally, their academic adjustments. And we had some control variables in this study, including the gender of the participant and their socioeconomic status. So here I'm showing you the results of a study in which we looked at depression symptoms in girls and their internet use. And we looked at this between the ages of 13 and 17. So we looked repeatedly at their depression symptoms and their use of internet over time. And I'm gonna try and not be too statistical here, but we used a specific analytical technique here. And it's called, well, basically what this analytic technique allows us to do is to look at within person change or within person variance. So typically when you run, and you're all undergrad or slightly more advanced students, when you run analyses and you do an analysis of variance or a correlation or a regression model, what you do is you estimate between person variance. So you say, well, here's Carla, here's Carlos. Carla spends more time online. Does she have worse depression than Carlos? And it's fine to ask that question. However, one problem or one limitation is that there could be pre-existing differences between Carla and Carlos. So they could have different family environments. They could have different initial levels of depression. So what's really nice when you look at within person variance or within person effects is that you're comparing Carla to Carla over time. So you're looking at whether changes in Carla's internet use have a direct impact on her symptoms of depression. So it's a better way of estimating possible causal effects when you're stuck with the correlational design. So here I'm modeling here is just within person effect. So looking at each person relative to their own baseline over time. And what we did find was that adolescent girls' internet use contributed to increased symptoms of depression over time. We did not find that girls' depression symptoms were driving them to spend more time online. So we found associations in one direction. And here I'm presenting some work from my postdoc, Gabriel Tiraboshi, who's actually from Brazil. He did his PhD at the University of São Paulo, in Ribeirão Preto. And he looked similarly at anxiety symptoms in girls. And he found that more internet use was associated with more symptoms of generalized and social anxiety in girls. We did not find the same thing in boys. However, and this is another study by Gabriel. Recently, he was looking at academic outcomes and video game playing. And here he found this interesting result for boys, where boys' video game playing over time between the ages of 7 and 10 was associated with reduced academic motivation. And I think this is really one of the first studies to use this kind of modeling to look at academic motivation or motivation in the academic context. And this last study from our group that I'll talk about, so a lot of people have sort of criticized me for only looking for negative effects. I don't find anything positive. So this is a study I conducted with a researcher from the Netherlands, from the University of Amsterdam, Elroy Boers, and he was from the field of communication. And people in communication have a very positive view of media. And his idea was, well, you know, social media use is social, video game playing could be social. Let's see if maybe it has a positive impact on pro-social behavior. And he ran the models and he came back and said, actually, it's the opposite. It's reducing pro-social behavior, the time spent online. So I tried. I just wanted to make that clear with everybody. So now I'm going to step out of work from my lab and just talk about some other studies that are, I think, really interesting in the field to give you a bit of an idea of what's going on in terms of nature of use and context of use. So we just experienced it during the pandemic. Did everybody here have online classes? Okay, online classes are great. They're great for people with reduced access. They're great during a pandemic. But I think before we all signed up for a lifetime of remote work, it's important to keep in mind also these possible inconveniences of using FaceTime and video chats. And you might have noticed this after a day of video chats during the pandemic, you might have been extra tired or extra exhausted. And this is completely natural because it's inducing what cognitive psychologists know as a mirror effect. We are not a species that's evolved to look at its own reflection for a long period of time. What it actually does is that it makes us, it puts us in a state of self-consciousness or of high self-monitoring. We become hyper-aware of every gesture, every movement. Same idea as when you're in a job interview. When you're in a job interview, you're highly self-conscious and highly self-monitoring. And what this is that it depletes our cognitive energy a lot quicker because it's a state that we can't sustain for a long period of time. So this mirroring effect is associated with cognitive fatigue. So imagine if you're day in, day out working or following classes, you might not be at your best performance. And there's also the idea of physical effect. So when we're talking to a screen, we typically move a lot less. So we don't allow ourselves to stretch back and to stretch back in. We try and confine our movements to remain on a small square. So it's also associated to headaches and neck pains in a lot of cases. Second, reading or not reading. Should we read or not read on screens? So schools over the last few years have sort of transitioned to electronic textbooks. Do you have electronic textbooks?
Yeah.
Most of you. Okay, electronic textbooks. So maybe you might want to know that. So according to meta-analysis of 54 studies, a lot of them experimental studies, worse retention of information when the information is presented on a screen. The advantage of reading on paper increases when there's a time limit and when the text is long. So think about an exam, not a good idea to administer an exam on a screen. And interestingly, because a hypothesis was, well, it's just the old generation, they're just not used to it. So the young generation that grew up with screens, they're going to be better at reading on screens. And that actually seems to be false. So the more experience you have reading on screens, the worse you seem to be at remembering the information. And the hypothesis, the explanation would be that when you read on screens, you use a superficial extraction style to retrieve the information. Whereas when you read on paper, you're more engaged and you are able to use a deeper extraction style. Again, with context of use. So there's tremendous debate currently in Canada. You can tell me if it's the same case in Brazil, whether youth should be allowed to bring their cell phones to school or not. Is this something that you talk about in Brazil?
Yes.
Cell phones?
There's a law right now in Rio de Janeiro that's like prohibiting kids to take cell phones.
So no cell phones in the school. So kind of the same idea as what's happening in Canada. So this is one study I'm showing you here, but there was recently an analysis of multiple studies that kind of goes in the same direction. In this study, now my slides I've lost their animation, so I can't give you the suspense, but that's fine. So in this study, a group of university students, kind of like yourselves, were randomly distributed into three teams. So it's into three groups. So it's an experimental study. And in the first group, they were told, you can keep your cell phone with you. The second group was told to leave their cell phone in their bag, out of sight. And the third group had to leave their cell phone in another room. So these three groups had that manipulation to distinguish them. Aside from that, they were exactly the same random assignment. And what they found was that the group who had their cell phone close to them consistently performed the worst on these tests. So these were a test of working memory, which you are supposed to be using when you're in class, and of fluid intelligence, including reasoning. And the further away the phone was, the better you performed on these tests of reasoning and working memory. So this is, as I said, this is not the only study. There were a series of studies showing cognitive distraction. The mere fact of having your phone close to you takes up valuable cognitive resources. So it's like taking up real estate in your brain, because you're thinking about, what am I going to answer to that message I just got? I wonder if this person wrote back to me. So it's bringing up all these problems you potentially have to solve instead of being able to focus on the task at hand. Now, another interesting idea which relates to device use is the idea of multitasking. Who here thinks that they're good at multitasking? Okay, interesting. So according to neuroscience, multitasking is a myth. So we actually have two states of concentration: deep concentration or divided attention. So yes, we can walk and chew gum at the same time, but that's maybe one of the only things. So if a task is highly, highly automatic, we can combine it with something else. But typically when we're multitasking, we're not doing two things at once. We're very rapidly alternating between two activities. And what happens when you're in this state of divided attention is, one, you make more errors. Two, it takes you longer to finish things than if you would have done one at a time. And three, it's extremely exhausting. So now I don't have the answer, but this is something that can come into play when we have our cell phones on us, and we're all guilty of this, or if we're trying to work on something and we have emails popping in. So we're in this environment, a work environment, and often a study environment in which we're forced to be in a state of divided attention rather than protect our precious time of deep, profound attention. So I think as a society, as individuals, we need to think about protecting our deep attention and focus, and avoiding these states of divided attention. So again, not surprising, adolescents spend a lot of, they tend to use screens late at night. There's even a trend, I'm not sure if it's still a trend, but there was a trend called vamping, which was staying up all night, messaging friends that were also staying up all night. Maybe one of the riskiest contexts of youth for context of use for young people is this late night use, which interferes with sleep, which can then have a severe impact on mental health. And I think things that are important to consider in the context are these issues, not just the issues of when and where, but also the issues of why. So use of screens to reduce a state of boredom or to avoid a stressful situation are probably the ones that we need to watch out for the most, and the ones that are most likely to be disruptive to mental health. But those that have the intention of helping youth connect with other people or access some kind of social support, well, I think those are probably to be encouraged. And to give again here some of the positives and the benefits, because youth do report benefits of their media use, and these are things like reduced solitude. Using social media helps reduce solitude, especially during the pandemic. It helps them access support or mental health resources, and for some, it allows a self-expression that can be beneficial for their self-confidence. It can allow identity exploration, and this is, I think, something to think about, especially in an ecosystemic perspective. If you have a youth that's part of a marginalized group that lives in an area where they don't have contact with youth that is part of their community, social media can be a lifeline for them to interact with other people that are similar. So all these findings seem kind of might seem hard to reconcile, because there's some research and my own and some of my peers showing negative impacts on mental health, but then the youth are also reporting some benefits. So I think there's one study, an older study now, that can help us maybe begin to understand why we have these discrepancies. So this was a study that was done on Facebook use and stress. So I know Facebook is older now, but I think you could kind of substitute it with more current social media platforms. So what they found in this study was that adolescents who had more friends on Facebook, so the higher the number of friends, the higher their stress levels were. So the higher their resting cortisol levels were when they woke up in the morning. So that seems strange. You'd think more friends, it's better, more social support. But that was not the case. However, they did find that youth who reported more interactions with their friends had lower cortisol levels. So it's not necessarily the platform here, but more how you're using the platform that's having an impact on mental health. So perhaps if you have a lot of friends and you do a lot of posting, that could be very stressful because you have this audience effect all the time. But if you have less friends, you're not posting as much, and you're really using it, you're using the messaging capacities of the platform, well, that probably won't do as much harm, or maybe might even benefit mental health. So I am going to end here with a few suggestions for research, youth practice. So I think suggestions for youth would be, well, we saw the statistic, right? 8 hours per day of screen time. So I think it's important for youth themselves to learn how to save some space and room in their lives for non-screen based activities. And I think this is a positive formulation. So instead of reducing screen time, save some space for yourself to deconnect, like save space for you to be offline, or save some time for you to be offline. Devices can be extremely distracting. So I think one concrete way we can help people is to just give them some practical tips, like turn off notifications on all the apps unless it's absolutely necessary. Move the most used apps away from the home screen, put your background on black and white so you don't see the red dots. So these are all little things that we can do to at least reduce the programming power of phones, or the conditioning power that phones can have on us. And finally, I think we can ask youth to self-evaluate their own usage, to think about, are you using out of boredom, or are you using to connect with friends? And I think youth are very capable of doing that, of having that reflection. So parents that are struggling can be encouraged to develop either a cell phone use contract with their adolescent, or develop a family media plan with their adolescent that sets some limits or some ground rules. Parents can also be encouraged to discuss the activities with their adolescents. So what is your favorite social media platform? What do you do on it? Without being judgmental, what are your favorite games, for example? And parents should also be encouraged to show a good example, because a lot of parents now are also heavy cell phone users and heavy media users. So in terms of research-based conclusions, I think that my work and the work of others helps show the importance of doing longitudinal research, but longitudinal research with repeated measures especially. I think that's one way that we have, since it's difficult to do a controlled study, is to look at repeated measures over time and to really try and see if there is a bidirectional association, and also look at if there's a real within-person change over time. I think my research with younger children does suggest that it's important to follow the recommendations of 1 hour or less of screen time per day. And I think especially with young children, a family plan, again, is very, very important to implement. And the research with adolescents, I've only looked at one individual differences, and this is a very basic categorization, boy, girl, but I think there are many other individual differences that we need to explore and better document in the research. And research that looks at nature of use and content and context longitudinally over time and in one study are also very rare. And I think that we need studies that bring all these features together. So I just want to show you a few things so in my lab, we try and do what's called knowledge mobilization or transfer. My postdoc created this. It's a comic based on his anxiety study. So it's one way that we have of reaching youth themselves or larger populations in a way that non-researchers can understand. And these are some materials that we developed for parents of young children that were in our study. So an infographic, just laying out the main key points of some of our study findings. And I'm going to thank you very much. This is our team, by the way. This is the group, and my email if you have any questions. Obrigada. Você tem perguntas?
I wonder if there is comparisons between the use of adolescents and adults, and if there is a correlation about the brain development, if there is a correlation of use, like I'm in adolescence and as I can't make the choices very. If there's.
Posso perguntar? Eu não perguntei hoje se todo mundo entende bem inglês aqui. Alguém precisa de tradução para as perguntas e para as respostas? Não precisa, né? Não precisa.
Vou precisar, cara.
Então tá, então vou pedir que cada um fale a sua pergunta em português também. E depois eu faço uma síntese da resposta.
Eu perguntei se existe alguma comparação entre estudos feitos com adolescentes e
não, eu pensei que era para eu perguntar
E alguém já dizer
eu pensei entender, mas
entendi.
não bom, entendeu?
tá,
Vocabulário para falar.
So I haven't worked as much on adults as on adolescents, but I do know that there are studies looking at young adults, university level students, early 20s. And those results seem to be similar to adolescents in the sense too that, the brain is developing till 20, 21, 22. So I think both adolescents and young adults probably have similar vulnerabilities in terms of brain also being not fully mature. So maybe more vulnerabilities to addictive types of behavior, to sensation seeking, to reward seeking behavior. But to my knowledge, there's no study that's compared experimentally or longitudinally young adults and adolescents. Is that?
So I have a lot of questions, but I'll try to save them because I know a lot of people want to to say some questions too. I'll first say a curiosity about Norway school. I think it was from Norway, is some country from Europe that tried to abolish completely books and actually only do digital activities with children. And they concluded after some time that it had a lot of negative impacts in the children's development.
Sweden.
It was in Sweden. So yeah. And my question is about the mirror effect that you said, because immediately when you talk about it, I thought about mindfulness. And mindfulness is a concept that goes in the opposite direction, right? It says that when you're more conscious about your body and every movement you're making, you're less stressed out and more in the moment. So I want to know if you know any correlation, because as I stand now, I maybe think that it's not only the mirror effect, but the way that you're using this mirror effect. Because when you are in a digital conference, you're not only seeing every movement you make, you're seeing if every movement you're making is beautiful, like if you're beautiful on the screen. So there is a self-judgment too. It's not only self-awareness. So maybe
It's self-monitoring is not, I think self-monitoring is very different from self-awareness and mindfulness. So these are, and there's a part of the brain that's associated with self-monitoring that's been identified. It's not the same thing as mindfulness, which is a diffused state. And self-monitoring is good for certain things, right? If you're at a job interview, you're in a very stressful situation where you have to be mindful of every detail. If you're meeting your boyfriend or girlfriend's parents for the first time, like you want to be like on your best behavior. Everything is calculated. But you're probably not coming up with your best like joke or story in those situations, right? You're a very limited version of yourself. You're in survival mode. It's in a sense being in survival mode. So I'm not saying that every Zoom meeting is that stressful, but it is a bit more stressful than a meeting that you would have in person and live. So I think the comparison is interesting, but I would put them more maybe on an opposite. When you're being mindful, you're not really self-monitoring. You're in the moment. You're living in your environment. Whereas where you're in self-monitoring, you're probably super like aware of the time passing. Every second probably feels like a minute. Whereas when you're mindful or in a state of flow, things are just kind of, yeah.
But when you're in a video conference, isn't there a way to close?
Yes, you can. I think you can close it on your own. Yes. Yes.
Well, I want to ask about, you said that the use of reading in notebook and cell phone compared to books is worse. So I want to ask about Kindle, because when I pick my Kindle, I feel like I'm reading a paper. Like it's not equal to my cell phone, you know? I want to know if the effects are equal. Yeah,
the Kindle's been examined in a few studies, and it's not as good as paper book as well. Even the Kindle. This is not my research, it's research of colleagues, and I was at a conference it was a public health conference, and the researcher was a neuroscientist saying all the negative effects, and we could hear the silence in the room and people going, I just want to specify too, especially for young kids. This is even worse for young kids because their visual systems are immature. As we get a bit older, I think we can monitor ourselves better and we can judge, like, is this hurting my eyes or am I getting tired? But especially for young children, they should not be reading on screens in elementary school.
I wanted to ask about the kind of content that people are consuming, like especially short form videos. Does it have a worse impact?
I think that's a really, really interesting research question, and we don't have that detail, but I think now, and we call them reels, like reels videos, given that they're increasingly popular and they're essentially what TikTok offers to these very short bursts, I think that should also be probably studied on its own as a possible, and its possible effects on, I would guess, attention span. But yeah, I think that's a very important topic. Thank you.
There's nothing like concrete about it.
I would be very surprised if there was anything longitudinal. There might be a couple of descriptive studies out, but I think with most research on social media, it takes a few years to have a study where you follow people over time, and by the time you're done, they've already moved on to the next platform. So there might be a few studies, but I don't think there's much yet. But maybe that could be your topic of dissertation. Yes. Or was there something?
I'm just wondering if there's like, I'm sorry, I wasn't here at the beginning, and I had to leave. But so I don't know if talk about it. But I was wondering if there's something like related to a cultural factor. You know, like for instance, there are cultures where we relate to each other in a certain way. There isn't exactly the same in other cultures. Like Brazil and US are completely different. So I was wondering if with digital interaction it's the same thing, or if there's something like.
If people are, so if for example, you take a WhatsApp conversation between two people in Brazil and a WhatsApp conversation between two people in Canada, is it different?
Yeah, if there's different impacts as well.
Different impacts. It's a good question. I haven't seen anything looking at cultural differences in how youth use media. I would also say, though, that we're not very good at doing research in general on how youth use media, because most of the studies will say, like, how many hours do you spend on social media? They won't ask them, do you post, do you chat? And then even if they chat, you might want to know, well, when you chat, do you say nice things? Are you bullying other people? Are you just send like videos and memes? So we know very, very little about that. There's another good topic for anybody's dissertation. But I will say, I will share one anecdote that I think is interesting and cautionary. I was at a meeting organized by the Quebec Minister of Health, and he invited different groups of society. So people from education, people from public health, people from First Nations communities. And the people from the First Nations community said, our concern is that social media is making us lose our culture, because the youth are not interacting with elders, are not interacting with other members of the culture. They're just absorbing this more American Eurocentric culture through TikTok and through Facebook and Instagram. And it's not to say that these there's no representation at all on these apps. There probably are, and they're probably increasing, but especially in the early stages, it's a majority overwhelming of Eurocentric cultural expressions on these apps.
So, hi. I was wondering.
Yasmin.
Yes. I was wondering if any research has been made on trying to understand why youth are having difficulties reducing their screen time. So, like, if they have fear of missing out, or if there is peer pressure on using and being up to date with the trends, like if there is something that they are saying that are the problem outside from.
That's an interesting question from youth themselves. I'm trying to think now from just the sondage, from the survey we did, if they mentioned, but probably, as you suspect, things like fear of missing out, I think they feel a need. This was one thing that they reported: feel the need to be in touch with friends all the time, be available if their friend needs them. These are some of the reasons that come up. But then there's probably other reasons that youth are less aware of. So it's the algorithms that are being used, the strategies, the conditioning effects of phones, the teams that design these social media are neuroscientists, learning psychologists, marketers. They know that the product is going to elicit repeated use.
So I've heard something very interesting from a student of mine. She once told me, Instagram, it's not cool. I don't like doing it, but I have to do it. Mm-hmm. I need to look at it. I don't know why, but and that's it.
Yeah. Sometimes they don't even have access to the reasons why they're using it. Absolutely.
My second question is about Twitch TV, which is a streaming platform. And it's kind of a mixture between watching and interacting. There's a Brazilian YouTuber named Selvish that made a video essay about Twitch. He took some time off YouTube and only did Twitch, and he talked about how Twitch is very different because you're not interacting with the video necessarily. You're interacting with the chat because people are chatting with each other, and it's a very different experience. I want to know if in your researches you have ever come across Twitch. And
Twitch is the video game app where you watch other people play with video games, right? Yeah.
You watch people game.
I'm not judging. I haven't come across any studies specifically on Twitch. No. I think in one or two surveys that I've seen, we've started asking them, do you play video games yourself, or do you watch also, do you watch other people, do you follow other people's video game playing? So we can have an idea of how frequently these activities are done, but I don't have any data on whether this is a positive or a negative for the people who engage in the activity.
Saying about Twitch, there's a feeling that most people, not most people, but some people feel with when they see a streamer for a long time, they acompanhar, como é que fala? Follow them for a long time, and they feel like connected with them.
Yeah.
So but this is dangerous because it's not a real relation. You know, you just see them, you're not seeing them.
It's called a parasocial relationship. Parasocial relationships. And I mean, regardless of whether it's Twitch or not, if the influencer is antisocial or has ideas that are, I mean, I know we've probably heard of a lot that ended up in the news, these influencers that have very negative views of women or negative views of social groups, they can come to yield a certain influence and power over youth. Yeah, I think you're.
Okay, hi. You talked about the negative impact of social media and digital, like within learning, but at the same time, there are so many schools adding like digital books and digital instruments in the school, and I wanted to know like how can, I don't know, scientists and maybe the government together work on that, because we have research showing the negative impacts, but it's like they're not listening.
I know.
You know, how can
I know. And we've tried in our province, we invited the Minister of Education and they just didn't show up to this conversation. And I mean, there's a lot of issues, but I think one problem is that in education, they were so happy to finally find things that would make their jobs easier. Like, thank God, technology is here to save the day, right? And now science are telling them, you got to get rid of it. And they're like, we don't want to hear it. Like, so that might be part of the issue, but I think we need to keep trying because it did work in Sweden. They did complete 180. They're like, okay, we're going back to paper, away with the technology. And we also have to be careful because technology companies will be like, we will give you these iPads for a very cheap price. Please take them, great. They made money off this too. There was an economic arrangement that happened. So we need to watch out for those things too. Yasmin?
I was wondering, like, you gave us a cutoff time, like 1 hour for kids, but there isn't anything in this talk about young adults and teenagers.
So it depends on who you ask for teenagers, but I would say around 2 or 3 hours per day. 3 hours of sedentary screen time is probably the most you want for your cardiometabolic health, and then some. So around 2 and 3 hours, but they're getting 8. So I think we should 3 hours. If you get the 3 hours, that'd be wonderful.
And just one more question, like this streaming music, where you're not like directly listening to.
Not the same thing. No, not the same thing. Yeah.
My question is kind of similar to the last one from Gabi. If I'm at the gym and I'm como é que fala esteira?
Looking at a
watching TV or streaming while I'm walking or running.
Yeah, that's a hard one, eh? That's a hard one.
You spoke about.
You found the way. You found the one way.
Yeah, okay. Yes, I'm good at new tasks. Watching, right?
I mean,
And it actually makes you like work harder. When I'm listening to music, I feel like I can run a lot more in the gym.
but does the screen make you work harder? I'm not sure. So we need a study, or we need to find somebody that can measure metabolism. Does having the screen and watching, and depending on the quality of the show, does it increase your metabolism or does it decrease it? Because maybe you want to pay attention and you're slowing down because you have the screen.
So I want to talk a little bit about parasocial relationships because it's what I'm studying now, and it may also be a case of the Facebook type of research, whereas parasocial relationships can create a chance for community participation. So like especially with fans, and there's a lot of research in K-pop fans that they create a certain community that expands from outside the online participation to participate in events and donations and other things that are very pro-social and that can help society in different ways. So more than looking back at the parasocial behavior, it's also a case of analyzing how that relationship is being formed and if it's a point of interest between people or if it's a form of self-isolation and only, having contact with this Twitch streamer or this K-pop idol. So there's a lot of interesting research to be done in that area, and there's a lot of it going on right now. So,
and there needs to be a sort of qualitative sorting out of what are even all the dimensions, so you can have an online relationship that's only online. You've never met the person before. Is that healthy or not healthy? And then you have these online and offline relationships, and how are these healthy? How do we turn all these connections to be the most healthy possible and the most supportive possible, and which ones are more universally negative for young people?
There's a research in self-expression and inducing in parasocial relationships that a lot of girls and people that are not accepted for their interests at home or in their offline community, they can find in these communities online a way of expressing themselves and really validating their own
their identity or their
what they like. So that would be interesting to me.
Yeah, but I think, and I'm not a clinical psychologist. You are all maybe more well versed in this, but I think any clinical psychologist would say these online communities are great, but can we bring this to some also developing your offline friendships and social support? And I imagine that has to be that should be a target. There was.
So first of all, I want to thank you for your presentation. It was again an amazing opportunity of learning. Based on what he said before, I was wondering about the mindfulness and the use of social media. So I want to ask you if you know a research or a lab that works with this kind of correlation. If we have work that talk about the correlation between mindfulness and the use of social media, I was wondering, mindfulness is related with being in the present moment. So, and sometimes the use of social media is kind of automatic. So you're just scrolling, and you don't even notice that you're scrolling for so many times. So, I was wondering if we have researches about it, if we have scientific information about it.
If I think the question is, does social media influence your mindfulness?
If we have researches that shows to us if the practice of mindfulness can, for example, decrease or not the use of social media.
I don't think there's data on it, but I think that there's something there. I'm trying to think with, I have there's a bit of research now looking at time spent outside, so being outside, away from technology. And there's also research on, being outside helps you connect with yourself, helps you be more mindful. And I've heard people bring that hypothesis before. More time outside is probably going to lead people to spend less time on screens, less time on social media. Maybe we can use this as an intervention, as a way to sort of balance out people's mental health. So as far as I'm concerned, I don't think there is any research directly showing a causal effect, but I wouldn't be surprised if there is one. So more mindfulness, less social media, but probably the other way around. The more social media or short videos you watch, it's probably harder for you to sit down, meditate, and connect in the moment without any stimulation. But I would believe so, yeah.
I was thinking with Yasmin's question about the parasocial relationships, if there is research on which platform could be more harmful, because depending on the platform, there is different rules about the content that is shared, and about the parasocial relationships and communities. I was thinking about Twitter, and there is a specific community that is ED Twitter that is revolved around eating disorders, and basically people with eating disorders sharing their gains and their weight, their diets and their habits. And I honestly scrolled through it, and it was so bizarre,
so disturbing. Yeah, that's the dark side of, yes, social media can help youth find resources, but there's also a problem with those kinds of support groups like pro-anorexia or eating disorders. There's also a problem of youth starting to diagnose each other. So instead of getting mental health, they are reaching out to each other and getting tips and helping, which is nice, but they might be delaying or avoiding seeking the actual professional help that they need. And there's a lot of misinformation about mental health that ends up circulating about ADHD, about depression, about bipolar, about all these problems. So I think that's a whole other concern.
You said the word on that acronym ADHD, and it made me remind when we were talking about fazer várias coisas ao mesmo tempo. Multitasking. And I remember in the first semester here in the university, I made a paper about freedom and ADHD. And I heard a podcast with a researcher named Russell Barkley, which is a very big researcher
in ADHD.
In ADHD. Between other things, he said that historically the human species is naturally with ADHD because this is very difficult to speak. Like in prehistorical times, we had to, at the same time we were eating, we were looking out for predators. Yeah. And so if it was that natural, how is our biology, our
phenotypical, well,
not adapted to this?
I think there's the idea of continuum too of functioning. So yes, it was probably beneficial to be able to divide your attention between two tasks and to keep attention to a threat. But when everybody said, gotta be quiet because there's a lion, the one that couldn't and probably got eaten by the lion. So there was also probably an advantage of being able to control your attention and exercise inhibition. But of course, the environment that we've created for ourselves, it's probably not the most adapted to our biology. We're not supposed to be sitting in a chair all day, looking at a screen, or, doing one thing, looking at one teacher all at the same time. Like these are things that we've developed for many reasons, but not because we wanted to design the best environment for our physiology or what we evolved for. That would be what I would think.
Eu queria perguntar, how can we share this research to alter, como é que é vestibular em inglês? Like, and then in Brazil, lecturers, and there's like absurd pressure on the students to go to the grading you want to perform, like psychology. There's an absurd pressure to me to study for an A. And I was thinking, like, there's people in vulnerability, social vulnerability. Vou sintetizar. what I want to ask is how we share this research to alter and main forward for them, because there are so many people that are passing like 7 hours a day studying in front of a computer just to pass in this exam, right?
Yeah.
And this is danger for these people. I want to know if there's a way to alter these exams.
Well, I just want to maybe clarify, like, so you're talking about the reading on screens, right? That's not the best way.
Yeah.
So
Because
it's
people there have not access to
paper.
like, hybrid education.
Yeah.
They need to spend more time alone with the computer or cell phone.
Yeah.
in-
So, I mean, just small practical things that you can do, because we can't like all of a sudden give them not an in-person education. Encourage them to take breaks every 25 minutes, and that's actually better for your attention span too. So put an alarm every 25 minutes, stop, get up, stretch, go outside, look at something that's far away. Because these are things that are good for your eyes. As bad as the screen is for your eyes, being outside in sunlight is good for your eyes. It'll help you have a refresh. So that's what I would encourage them to do. If there's no other choice, then program in breaks that you actually stick to. Make it a point to stop, move around, and to offset some of the negative impacts of the screens. Or maybe make it a point to take more notes after reading each paragraph. Take a little note to make sure you actually read it in depth, not that you're not skimming. So I would try to use those kinds of strategies.
Yeah, I think what you say about the lighting is very interesting, because I think it has correlations about our biological
Evolution.
yeah, not like in the sleeping biological timing.
Yeah.
Cycle.
Yeah.
So I am very interested in a personal level, because that I think when we stay too much in classes and not going outside, and then we're not how can I say, we have insomnia or something like that, and then we go to the phones again, and I think that's a
Vicious cycle.
so,
Yeah.
So I think that tips of biological things like going outside more, it's better than, I don't know, just saying don't use the phone.
Don't use the phone. Yeah, and you could. I mean, there's little things too, like putting on the do not disturb. That you can have that come on, and you can still use your phone, but at least you won't get a vibration every time somebody sends you a message or an email comes in. So I think those are small things we can do to make our mental health and our life hygiene and sleep hygiene better.
I would like to hear some more about the effects on the reward system.
So the effects on the reward system have not been directly studied in a lot of cases. There's a few studies, and these are on adults, I think young adults, looking at, single release situations of dopamine. And there's one study that's very famous now, and they found that playing video games can release as much dopamine as amphetamine use. So yeah, so very intensive stimulation. So we know this. Can't say it's been done in adolescents longitudinally, but I don't know if we really need to do that if we show it in like one sample of adults. So we know that does trigger dopamine. Aside from that, I'm not sure if they've looked at any other chemical markers of the response to reward. I also have, I wish I would have shown you this study today, actually. I also have a colleague who works at McGill, and she studies the brain, and she studies the brain of video game users. And she did a study, a very famous study now, where she recruited non-video game players, and she randomly divided into two groups. And she had one group play a platform game like Super Mario Bros. And the other group, she had them play a first-person shooter game. And then I think it was 40 hours of video games, and she analyzed their brains before and after. And what she found in the first-person shooter, changes in the caudae nucleus, which processes reward and is responsible for addictive behavior, had increased. And the hippocampus, which is very important in learning, memory, depression, had shrunk. So she found these two very negative changes in the first person shooter group.
But it's more associated with games, playing games.
Yes, we don't know as much with social media, but there is I'm wondering now if there's maybe one. I could check if there's anything on the social media, but mostly it's been done in games. Yeah.
Because it sounds like it's so much easier to be rewarded in social media and internet chatting that maybe could we be less tolerant to frustration, maybe in real life interactions.
It could absolutely be. We can become more impatient, less tolerant to frustration. And I mean, they also use typically they use the what's it called, the interval reward scale, right? So you never know when you're going to get the answer, and then so sometimes you might experience a decrease in dopamine or like an increased stress, and sometimes you get the unexpected reward and you're happy. So it could also make you, I think, moodier.
Yeah.
A lot moodier.
What's the name of the researcher?
Which one for the video games?
Yeah.
I'll give you the reference after for the video game.
Mais alguma pergunta?
Is there any way we could participate in further researches you do or with your team?
To work, yeah, you can send me an email. Send me an email. We can see if there's we always have projects. But then I was telling Patricia today, there's programs also for like short internships to come to Canada. The ELAP program is fantastic. Or maybe it can be something that we can do. There can be sometimes internships at a distance, so we can.
ELAP is for undergraduates too?
No, ELAP is for graduates. But you have MyTax, no?
Sorry?
MyTax. There's
MyTax for undergraduates?
I know some of the federal universities have it. MyTax is only undergraduate,
I
and
haven't heard about that, but we can
you can search for that.
É programa que dá bolsa.
É só pra pós, né?
Não, esse MyTax, ela falou que é para graduação.
Sherbrooke, Sherbrooke is a French-speaking university?
But you speak English too.
Yeah.
We are not seeing your email because something.
Wait. No, that's extra slides. Here we go.
And also, could you talk a little bit more about displacement? You talked very shortly in the beginning.
So so displacement is kind of the idea that the reason why media use is negative, it's because it takes up time from other things. So it borrows time from your sleep, it borrows time from your physical activity, from you doing your homework. And in these hypotheses, like you could be watching TED Talks. Does everybody know what a TED Talk is? 10 hours of TED Talks, you will still have bad mental health. Even if it's the best quality, it'll still be negative for you.
Mais alguém?
I don't know if I can, express my thought to you clearly, but
So far, so good.
yeah, I was wondering if you have any advice to help us to be maybe less harmed by this use of cell phone and laptop during reading. Because, for example, here in Brazil, books are, too expensive. So for me, for example, I don't have the opportunity to buy the books I need to study and, to have a better graduation. So I want to know if you have some advice to us. So, because for example, I spend a lot of hours studying in my cell phone, have my laptop. So if you have some advices.
Well, the laptop over the phone. Try and use the laptop. I would try and use the laptop more than the phone, if you can. Like study more on the laptop. And I think as I recommended, also take more breaks. Make sure you take breaks, and at least if you can, take notes on paper. because it's taking notes is the same thing as screen. So at least if you can take notes on paper, take notes on paper, that would probably be the best case. Reduce.
And maybe being offline when reading.
Turn off,
Then
yeah.
You won't be disturbed by other things.
Yeah, put your phone on airplane mode or put the computer offline, and so you can focus on the reading.
So you use more laptop than cell phone.
Yes.
Second, have more pauses and turn off notifications and
Turn off and take notes on paper.
okay.
Handwritten. Handwrite your notes.
I've listened before that playing video games could actually bring some good advantages. Is it true?
There's a few studies that have found some advantages. So some puzzle games can have cognitive benefits, but things like Tetris, things that are asking you to do visual spatial organization. Some games like Super Mario Bros, where you have to navigate a world, can improve spatial navigation depending on the strategy that the player uses. So if you're actually creating a map in your head to locate yourself, that can have some benefits. But most players don't do that. Most players use stimulus response. They remember, see this stimulus, turn right. And what was the other one? Yeah, there's research on, playing video games and visual attention. Visual attention is, responding to cues in your stimulus, which is good, but in terms of real life benefits, we don't really use our visual attention that much unless you're going to become a fighter pilot. So you have to think too about what you're gaining and what you're losing, I think. And pro-social games as well. There are video games that, allow interactions in pro-social. Those can have benefits also.
Chega, tem mais algum tempinho. Querem perguntar mais, comentar? Tem mais alguma?
I think everything is just trying to kill us because we are students and we use Notion. I guess everybody here uses Notion. It's so easy because we just type like 3 weeks before. We can just see what we typed 3 weeks ago. So the paper is just complicated at the same time.
I would like to add about speedrunners. You were talking about video games and how they are negative influence, but I was seeing a video about how speedrunners could beat the Mario game without looking, like with a blindfolded. I was thinking how attention this I needed that attention, to make certain things that I think are on another level. I think it's incredible. Just a commentary.
So, Caroline, I would like to thank you once again. It was an outstanding speech, a very rich discussion. Eu espero ver vocês no programa de pós-graduação, no mestrado, no doutorado. Sei que tem alguns aqui, mas muita gente da graduação, né? Se vocês vierem para o mestrado e para o doutorado, fica mais fácil chegar até a Caroline, né? Trabalhar com ela, né? Então, essa é uma carreira importante. A gente precisa cada vez mais de pesquisadores que investiguem essa temática. Tem muito a ser construído ainda. Então, até a próxima vez. Muito obrigada, gente.
Many tips for us too.
It was fun. It was good. They're really nice. You want the reference, right?